Hey crew, it's Pit, and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are beginning our exploration of Book 4 by ALeister Crowley. Although it is not written by him, we will be reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. In addition to that, if this is the first time you've seen me and you have not watched the introduction, the groundwork video for this, it is highly recommended to fall back and watch that. I know it is long, but you will probably be upset if you are expecting something and you have not watched that. With that being said, we are going to dive in and begin our exploration of Book 4 by ALeister Crowley, or Frater Perdurabo, and Soror Viracem, Mary Diestis Sturgis. Alright, so, a note. This book is intentionally not the work of Frater Perdurabo. I do want to point out, like I mentioned in the video yesterday, that I was going to do the video on Thelema. Alright, that's what this is. There doesn't appear to be any reason to. Right, the things that are in the wiki should be contained in here. This is 409 pages worth of book. It's already going to be a few weeks long, and so there's no need to extend it. We will probably dismiss most of what Thelema stands for along the way. Alright, so experience shows that his writing is too concentrated, too abstruse, too occult for ordinary minds to apprehend. It is very important to remember at this particular moment in time that Frater Perdurabo is just a name assumed by Mr. ALeister Crowley. This appears possibly to be written by Mary instead of him, but if it is from him, it doesn't really make any sense to make this distinction. Right, either he's attached to it or he's not, and if he is attached to it, then it is going to be the same work whether or not he is using the pseudonym or not. Right, the same guy is going to come up with it. There is no need for a distinction between Frater Perdurabo and Mr. Crowley. They are exactly the same person with exactly the same peccadillos, and so this makes absolutely no sense. If he is attached to the book, which it says right here that he is, then this is the work of him. Denying that makes no difference. It is thought that this record of disjointed fragments of his casual conversation may prove alike more intelligible and more convincing, and at least provide a preliminary study which will enable the student to attack his real work from a standpoint of some little general knowledge and understanding of his ideas and of the form in which he figures them. Part 2, Magic, is more advanced in style than Part 1. The student is expected to know a little of the literature of the subject and to be able to make an intelligent view of it. That is something that I do expect to be able to do. I do have a little bit of knowledge. I do know some things at a minimum. I don't claim to know all things. I don't claim that my system is the only system, but my system does work, and I have tried some of the things from the other systems and they don't, and so therefore I say that my system's probably a better one. In addition to that, I have the fruits of the spirit that Mr. Crowley absolutely did not have. I have the fruits of the physicality that, again, Mr. Crowley absolutely did not have for the entirety of his life. And we went through that in extensive detail yesterday. It was 2.5 hours worth of video. Yes, that is long, but we went through a lot of stuff over there. But I do plan on being able to take an intelligent view of it, probably a more intelligent view than the authors have. And I know that sounds a little bit prideful, but I promise you it's not. This part is, however, really explanatory of Part 1, which is a crude outline sketch only. If both parts are thoroughly studied and understood, the pupil will have attained a real grasp of all the fundamentals and essentials of both magic and mysticism. I wrote this book down from Frater Peredurabo's dictation, so directly involved, at the Villa Caldorazzo, Posillipo, Naples. That's the one that Mussolini booted him out of. I do want to address that. I got called out in the comments, and you're right, many people have been exiled from countries for no good reason whatsoever, but that absolutely does not appear to be the case with Mr. Crowley. There have been very valid reasons for everything that was explained for why he was kicked out of the country. I personally would have done the same thing to him, right? If he was engaging in the things that he claims to have engaged in, and he doesn't even have to be caught in it. I don't want him anywhere around me, and if I'm in the position of authority to make that decision, I will absolutely get rid of him. He's not out there teaching peace, love, and harmony. He's teaching do what thou wilt. And while that sounds like a perfectly fine thing, right there, true will is defined as what you are meant to do in life. Well, we saw very blatantly, with no equivocation, that Mr. Crowley was not following his true will. He was following his true desires, and that was let out throughout the entirety of his life. There was no slacking off from that particular problem that he had for the entirety of his life. And so it's not like he was Jesus walking around talking about, well, you need to love your neighbor, right? That's not what he was doing. He was not doing Buddha. He was not any of these other religious figures who were out there preaching peace and harmony, and that upsets the government. He was out there preaching something decidedly different, and therefore it is perfectly understandable to me why they would want to get rid of him. Now, you are allowed to do many things, right? And you are not allowed to violate the laws blatantly of the country in which you are engaged in, right? That is a problem that we are currently facing in our current situation with the people who cross the border illegally. It doesn't matter if they haven't broken any other law. They violated the law to come in here. They should be exiled. If they are here illegally and they are violating the law, they should be exiled. If they are here legally and they are violating the law, they should be exiled, right? And so his problem was violating the law, not even just necessarily moral standards. I understand those are definitely adjustable. He was doing many things that many people in the area would consider evil, right? Not just kind of misguided, but directly evil. Blood magic is directly evil. Participating in sexual magic in the manner in which he did is decidedly evil. And I do not use those terms lightly. There was no redeeming values whatsoever from the entirety of his life as recorded. There was nothing that gave me any indication whatsoever that he was ever at any point in time correctly aligned with the betterment of humankind. And so, part of the reason why we're doing this, the reason we did a 2.5-hour video on him personally, was because of that, right? I am directly, antithically opposed to everything that the man stood for. And while he talked a good game, his good game was talked with subterfuge, right? He was intentionally misclouding or clouding his beliefs so that it appeared to be more palatable to the masses. There are many things that were recorded on the wiki that are simply inexcusable to me, pedophilia being one, forced sexual intercourse being another one. Neither one of those are acceptable in any way, shape, or form, including up to coercion and not direct force. All of that is directly repugnant to everything that I stand for. And so I am doing this simply because there may be some information from this that we can extract. He was very good at taking other people's ideas and conglomerating his own into them. And so there are some nuggets of wisdom, I am sure, contained in this book. But I am also sure that most of it is going to be dismissible. But I can't dismiss it until we have gone through it. We did that with astrology. We did it with tarot. One of them was dismissible. One of them was not. We've done that with several of the other authors, right? We are reading through to see what they had going on. We dismissed Levi completely. Mr. White, he's got some good ideas. Mr. Steiner was a little bit misguided. He was believing some wild things, but it wasn't directly evil. Mrs. Blavatsky, same thing. She believed some pretty wild things, some misguided things, some definitely anachronistic things, right? Best left into the past. But she wasn't directly evil. I do believe that this guy is, and I do not use that lightly. All of his actions lead me to believe that he was deliberately deceptive in all of the things that he did, and he was very much not in alignment with the betterment of humankind. And I do believe that addresses that issue. If not, you can let me know down below. You are very respectful. You always are. But yeah, I do not care for the guy at all. Every one of his personal decisions was absolutely horrible. And the fact that he got kicked out of, 4 countries in 5 different instances, that does tell you something, right? It's not just one country mad because of his moral problems. It was all of the countries mad because of his actions, and that is a problem. He got kicked out of almost everywhere as he went. All right. Where I was studying under him, Avila actually prophesied to us long before we reached Naples by that brother of the A Delta, who appeared to me in Zurich. Any point which was obscure to me was cleared up in some new discourse. The discourses have consequently been rearranged. Before printing, the whole work was read by several persons of rather less than average intelligence, and any point not quite clear, even to them, has been elucidated. Oh, so you showed it to him himself. I know, I should not be doing that. May the whole path now be plain to all. Frater Puradurabo is the most honest of all the great religious teachers. That is a provable lie just from the wiki. Others have said, believe me. He says, don't believe me. He does not ask for followers, would despise and refuse them. That is a lie. That is an out-and-out blatant lie that they are telling you in this book to deceive you. This is deception being played out right before your eyes, because we did a 2.5-hour video of the wiki where we saw that every time anybody came up, even attempting to follow him, he absorbed them readily and with no hesitation whatsoever. As a matter of fact, in this very villa, this very place where they later get kicked out of, he was taking up followers. He was not despising them, and he did not refuse them. That is an out-and-out blatant lie, up to and including the other author of this book, Miss Mary Sturgis, I think was, right? She was there. She was one of the followers. He didn't despise or refuse her. As a matter of fact, he probably didn't despise her even a little bit. And this is the place also where he was doing the forced copulation with the fellow, right? The one guy who was complaining because he was being forced to engage in activities that he did not want to, right? This is that spot. And once again, that is not a despisal or a refusal. Now is it? Now, this is what I say, right? And I actually mean this, right? Now, I'm not going to tell you that I will not ask for followers or I will despise or refuse them. There will be people who come to me for greater learning. I have a little bit of knowledge, but I do not claim to be a master, right? I am here with a level of understanding that I am attempting to relay to other people, giving away levels of responsibility along the way. I am here to clearly and as possible state things to clear up confusion in places. But don't believe me. How many times have I told you to verify the things that are written in this book? I attempted to write in a way that are repeatable by other people so that you can test it. Don't believe me. Put it to the test. That is literally what I say, right? And I do mean that, right? There is a certain level of trust that has to be extended if you are going to attempt someone else's procedures, right? But beyond that, right, don't just assume that I am correct in anything that I state, no matter how obvious the logic may be. Test it for yourself. And so that definitely sets me apart, right? There are other people who don't do that, and there are people that do, right? I'm not going to try and deny that either, but most of the ones that do are like this, where they're telling you one thing and they're probably intending something different, right? If you don't believe me, that is fine. I am not here to convince anyone. I am here to tell everyone, right? And you don't have to believe me. This channel is not for everyone. It's open to anyone, but it is definitely not for everyone. Next. He wants an independent and self-reliant body of students to follow out their own methods of research. And again, that is me. And we are in agreement in some of the terminology, right? The do what thou wilt is not horrible on its face. It's horrible in the way it was executed. The demonstration of it was absolutely not what is written about it. And I know that because I did read ahead in the Thelema, and I saw what the definition is supposed to be, right? Do what thou wilt is your true will, which is your true calling, which is not sex magic. If he can save them time and trouble by giving them a few useful tips, his work will have been done to his own satisfaction. And again, I have tools. The Infinite Integration playlist is where it is freely available, where you can buy a copy and you can get the handy dandy little notebook that's got the hints, right? The tips, the way that I did it, the procedure outline so that you can replicate it or prove it wrong, right? Those who have wished men to believe them in them were absurd. A persuasive tongue or pen, or an efficient sword with rack and stake, produced this belief, which is contrary to and destructive of all religious experience. The whole life of Frater Perdurabado is now devoted to seeing that you obtain this living experience of truth for, by, and in yourselves. Soror Viracam, Mary Diestis Sturgis. Book 4, Part 1. Meditation, the way of attainment of genius or Godhead, considered as a development of the human brain, issued by order of the Great White Brotherhood, known as the A Delta A Delta. Oh, I see. Like, I've heard references to the Great White Brotherhood. I have never seen this laid out before, and that absolutely makes sense why they didn't show up around here when I started talking about things. That absolutely makes sense, because if this is their base, right? If the Great White Brotherhood is actually the thing that this guy started, yeah, y'all better not show up. I will teach you something. You show up out here with that. And I'm not talking about physical violence. Preliminary remarks. Existence, as we know it, is full of sorrow. Now, to mention only one minor point. Every man is a condemned criminal, only he does not know the date of his execution. This is unpleasant for every man. Consequently, every man does everything possible to postpone the date and would sacrifice anything that he has if he could reverse the sentence. Well, you are starting off pretty fucking horribly right here. Absolutely, right? Existence is full of sorrow. That is a truth, and if you focus on that, that is all that you will see. But existence is full of beauty. It is full of love. It is full of growth. It is full of affection. It's full of wonderful things. And if you focus on that, that is all you will see. Sorrowful things can happen to you, but it is up to you what you're going to do with that, right? You don't get to choose the circumstances. You get to choose the reaction. This is not a prison planet. You are not here to be tortured. I know, wild concept. It is something that I don't see anybody else talking about, but it is something that I intrinsically believe. It is in the realm of speculation, but I explain it in this book, right? We are here for the experience of life. Some of those experiences are pretty terrible. See the origin story where, kind of talk about my childhood, which was pretty terrible. But all of the pretty terrible things that happened in my life taught me things, and I learned to grow from them. The recent terrible things that happened in my life, I've grown from them and I've learned some things, right? This broken leg that I am not quite 4 months over, right? It happened April 28th. I'm planning on starting to run next week. And I'm on a different level than most people. I have a viewpoint that most people don't have. I have the ability to alchemize these issues fairly seamlessly. Now, that does not mean that I don't get salty and I don't have bad days. Everybody has that, but my good days outweigh the bad days, even when the bad days should be stacked up higher, because I have that capacity. I do not view this as a prison planet, and that makes all the difference in the world. The power of perspective is a big thing. So if you are looking at life as full of sorrow, then you are absolutely going to find that life is indeed full of sorrow. There will be people that die. There will be people that leave. There will be situations that are sorrowful throughout the entirety of your life. That is a truth. You cannot get away from that. But that is not the point of life, right? To mention only one minor point, every man is a condemned criminal, and he does not know the date of his execution is fucking stupid. That is a horrible way of looking at it. Yes, you are going to die, but that's not because you did something wrong, right? It is because immortality is highly overrated. If you were here for longer than 100 years, you would be exceedingly bored, and you would probably run off and do some stupid shit. If you lived to be 1,000 years old, I'm sure that we would have more wars. And we have plenty enough with the short lifespan that we have. This is another one of the assumptions that is just victim mentality blatantly exposed, right? Now, granted, most of the control systems are fully based upon that victim mentality thing, right? You are born a criminal, and it is not unless you accept this sacrifice or you do the deed yourself that you get forgiven from sin, and that is simply not true. And so, yes, this can be an unpleasant experience sometimes, but it is largely due to how you look at it. And we have seen through the 2.5-hour video yesterday that Mr. Crowley did not know how to look at anything correctly. And I do mean anything. Practically, like, he was inconsistent in his own beliefs. All the way through his life, he did not even keep a consistent set for any due period of time. Like in this, when he was in this villa, he had one set of beliefs, and then when he moved somewhere else, he picked up those, right? He was worshiping Allah and the Enochian gods at the same time, which is a little bit wild. And there was some other things, right? He is definitely not consistent in his own belief systems, right? That indicates some degree of unrest. Practically all religions and philosophies have started thus crudely by promising their adherents some such reward as immortality. There is no reward of immortality. You are already immortal, not in the physical coral, but your soul is. It was somewhere prior to being here. It will return to somewhere when it leaves. I believe that it is the same place. That is part of the Trinity and the Divine Explained. I will try to remember to link that video. That's the one in here where I talk about those things. And so you already have the immortality, right? The way that the control system works is that they convince you that you don't. They convince you that you have to go through them and their procedures in order to attain that. The soul is immortal. There is nothing that can stop that. Like, even the control systems, even though they misrepresent it, admit that, right? They say forever. Now, they don't say forever in the backwards way. They don't tell you that there was some existence prior to being incarnated, although that has to be if the soul is immortal. Now, I believe that the soul is an individualized sliver of the divinity portioned out for you in this 5D experience to navigate through with this temple. When you make decisions, the spirit carries it out. The body is the temple that moves through and makes it happen. I do not promise that you will attain immortality for anything that I do. Now, you are free to choose your belief systems. My belief system is based upon some extensive study, and so the things that I believe are not arbitrary. They are not pulled out of nowheres. They are assimilated from various belief systems, getting to the core, right? And we did that with the Old Testament. The Bible study was 162 videos, well, 161 videos of the actual Bible, where we read through and saw the inconsistencies and the problems and all of those things. There is no hell in the Old Testament. There is no heaven in the Old Testament. You have the land of the dead to which everyone returns. That is the entirety of the Old Testament, how it is described. The sacrifice was forgiveness of sin, but for the mortal coil. It was not so that you did not burn in a lake of fire. That lake of fire does not exist in the Old Testament. The heaven that with the golden streets that we get in the New Testament, again, does not exist in the Old Testament. There is an abode where God dwells, but we don't go there. That is a whole, unless you are pulled, right? Then, like the prophets get pulled out of their bodies. Unless that happens, you don't go there. You don't go there when you die. Well, that is according to that system. Now, in my system, you came from God, you return to God. It is that simple. He sends you here to learn things. You come here, you learn things. Those things that you learn, they are outside the scope is a hard word, but God is immortal, boundless, limitless. He is the creator of all of us. When we die, we return to him, and so he can't know grief, right? If you return immediately to him, there is no grieving process for him. There is no hardship for him. There is no sorrow for him. He knows that through us. That is why we are here, for the experience of being here. We are to align ourselves with the higher calling, the true will, not in the way that is described. Well, I can't say described because we hasn't got to that. The way that was described in the wiki, right? Like the do whatever you want is not it, right? It is follow your true calling. That is do what thou will. And follow your true calling is never going to be debauchery. Never. Not a single instance ever is it going to be. It's never going to be blood magic. Never, right? That is you acting in abhorrence to your own free will. Right? You're choosing the wrong side of the path. You get the choice, but you're choosing the wrong side. All right, back to the text. No religion has failed hitherto by not promising enough. The present breaking up of all religions is due to the fact that people have asked to see the securities. Men have even renounced the important material advantages which a well-organized religion may confer upon a state, rather than acquiesce in fraud or falsehood, or even in any system which, if not proved guilty, is at least unable to demonstrate its innocence. Being more or less bankrupt, the best thing we can do is attack the problem afresh without preconceived ideas. Let us begin by doubting every statement. Let us find a way of subjecting every statement to the test of experiment. I think I've done that. Is there any truth at all in the claims of various religions? Not really. Let us examine the question. Our original difficulty will be due to the enormous wealth of our material. To enter into a critical examination of all systems would be an unending task. The cloud of witnesses is too great. Now, each religion is equally positive and each demands faith. I do not believe that at all. You can achieve a positive effect from a religion, right? But they are not all equal, not at all, not even in the slightest way, right? The difference between Christianity and Islam is massive, right? One of them tells you to behead people, one of them doesn't. And that's not to say that the one that doesn't didn't, right? They definitely did, but they were not following their own religion. The other religion, it is absolutely explicitly told to you, right? These people are infidels, cut off their head. If they do this act, throw them off of a building. If they do this, stone them. Now that one they share. But outside of that, right, Christianity was doing away with that for the large part. There's many things about that that I do agree with, just not the end result, right? The attempt to put an end to Judaism, I absolutely agree with, for a variety of reasons which are described in the Old Testament. And so I do not believe that each religion is equally positive. However, you can find God wherever you are because God will find you where you are. And so if you are in a control system and you are doing the right things, right? If you are actually following the 10 Commandments, you're probably going to be all right. If you actually follow what Jesus did in the Sermon on the Mount, you're going to be all right. If you actually uphold the 8 pillars, you're going to be all right. It's all of the extra stuff that's going to get you into troubles, right? If you go out and you try and uphold the whole law of Judaism, well, you're probably going to get some negative repercussions from that. Some of those laws are absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible. And so they are not all equal. I do not believe that they are all equal. I do not believe that they are equally positive. I do believe that you can find positivity in them, right? If you follow all the works of Allah or Muhammad, you are definitely going to be going down the wrong road. In the exact same way that if you follow David, you will definitely be going down the wrong road. And each demands faith. This we refuse in the absence of positive proof, but we may usefully inquire whether there is not any one thing upon which all religions have agreed. For if so, it seems possible that it may be worthy of really thorough consideration. It is certainly not to be found in dogma. Even so simple an idea as that of a supreme and eternal being is denied by a third of the human race. Legends of miracle are perhaps universal, but these, in the absence of demonstrative proof, are repugnant to common sense. Now, I'm going to point out here that I do believe in a God. I do believe that there is a creator. I do believe that we are here explicitly at the will of the creator. But I do not suppose him to be a sky daddy waiting up there to rain down judgment upon mankind. And I've fairly well explained that already, but we are here for the experience, right? This is not some guy waiting to judge you. That's not how it goes. Now, I also quite firmly and often state that there is no way for anyone to give surety about the eternal. I relay in this book my own personal experience by which I came to know that the eternal is a real thing. That is not something that I can give you. I can relay the experience, but I cannot give you the experience. And the actual experiencing of it is what causes it, right? And so while I can tell you the means, I can tell you what happened, I cannot give you my experience for it. That is going to be intrinsic, right? And so I am emphatic on maintaining that, right? Even though I emphatically believe that there is a creator, you are free not to. Right now, you can have a different interpretation on how it works because none of us will ever be able to be proven true here. There is no amount of clairvoyant observation, there is no amount of meditation or anything that can prove that. All of it is going to be intrinsically a personal experience that you have to experience. You can only hear about somebody else's experience. It is not going to do anything on a conversion level, right? It's one of the reasons why I tell you to test what I say. Why I tell you to put it into practice and see if it works. If it works, good. If not, let me know, right? It can be all of the things that have happened for me, the healing that I have done, right? I asked for healing. I got shown how to do it. And so I have done it. I have healed myself to a very large degree. There are people intrinsic in my life who still don't believe it, and they can see it. It's wild. Absolutely wild. And so it is not to be found in dogma. That is true. And the idea of the supreme and eternal being, I believe that it is important, right? I don't want to say it's not important, but whether or not you come to that realization isn't all that important. If you are acting correctly, if you are aligned for the betterment of humankind, if you are following the 8 laws of creation, if you are loving, right? If you are doing your true will, not what you want, but your true will, then you're going to be all right. But what are the origins of religions? How is it that unproved assertion has so frequently compelled the assent of all classes of mankind? Is this not a miracle? No, it is not. Most people are stupid. I know, that sounds a little bit harsh, but if you are here, you are probably on the higher end of the intelligence level. And that just means 50 to 100, right? Not necessarily 75 to 100, but you're on the higher end. You're listening to me read a book. That's on the higher end of the intelligence scale. But most people are not. Think of the average man. Now, understand this. Fully half of the population is dumber than the average man. That's how averages work. And so most people are middling. There are some who are exceptionally stupid, and there's some who are exceptionally bright. But most people are in the middle. They're between 25 and 75, which is not great. It's not horrible, but it's not great. And so that is why, right, to a large degree, people are stupid and they are easy to fool. Mr. Crowley has proven that himself, as did Mr. Levi. But on top of that, the control systems have a very effective way of ensuring that you consent, right? They either cut off your head or they exile you. They send you somewhere else. That is not always a good thing. Sometimes it is, but always no. And so their method of spreading Christianity, for example, was at the point of a sword. I know people do not like to hear that, but Constantine instituted it and it converted the whole nation. Yeah, kind of, sort of. Well, but that was at threat of force, right? If you don't do these things, then you get to die, and that's a little bit of a problem. And most of Christianity's spread has been due to that, right? If you come to the New World, look at what they did to the Native Americans, North and South America, right? That was this particular religion. Right? They love your neighbor. Let's genocide you. Let's eradicate your languages. Let's get rid of your culture entirely because, living at peace with nature is absolutely antithetical to the Catholic religion. Right? Lots of problems. That is how. How has the unproven assertion so frequently compelled stupidity and force? That is how. There is, however, one form of miracle which certainly happens. The influence of the genius. There is no known analogy in nature. One cannot even think of a superdog transforming the world of dogs, whereas in the history of mankind this happens with regularity and frequency. Now, here are three supermen, all at loggerheads. What is there in common between Christ, Buddha, and Muhammad? Is there any one point upon which all three are in accord? No point of doctrine, no point of ethics, no theory of hereafter do they share, and yet in the history of their lives we find one identity amid many diversities. Muhammad was born a prince and died a beggar. Or Buddha was born a prince and died a beggar. Muhammad was born a beggar and died a prince. Christ remained obscure until many years after his death. Elaborate lives of each have been invented by devotees. Written by devotees. And there is one thing in common to all three, an omission. We hear nothing of Christ between the ages of 12 and 30. Muhammad disappeared into a cave. Buddha left his palace and went for a long while into the desert. Each of them, perfectly silent up to the time of the disappearance, came back and immediately began to preach a new law. This is so curious that it leaves us to inquire whether the histories of other great teachers contradict or confirm. All right, before we get into the next part, let's talk about this because there is definitely a difference between these three people. Major differences. First off, we have Buddha, right? Now, Buddha is based off of the dissolution of some of the Eastern Hindu things, and it was an assimilation of some of those beliefs with some of the far Western beliefs and mingled into the practices of Buddha. But Buddha was overall a very positive influence. Right now, I have not done an extensive life history of Buddha. We have not read through the works of Buddha. I am not extensively read into those things. I have done that with Christianity. I have done that with Judaism. I have not done that with Islam, but here's the thing to know about Islam, right? Let's do this first. I don't know enough about Buddha to speak upon that intelligently. That is one of the things that I try to maintain for myself. If I don't have the information, I don't try to extrapolate it. But I do for these other ones. It is almost a certainty that the records that we have in the New Testament, namely Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels, were target written for an audience, assimilating other concepts. Those concepts appear to be linked to Hellenistic Gnosticism, which is a big, big pull. Now, there is many different ways that the Gnostics lived, and many of them were before Christ, and many of them were after Christ. There is a long range of time period. But many of the teachings that you find in those four books, you can actually find contained in Gnostic texts that predate those books. In addition to that, we talk about this in the Bible study, they were written for specific audiences. Matthew was written for Ethiopia. Mark was written for Alexandria. Luke was written for Cappadocia, and John was written for Turkey, basically. Each one of those places was a very distinct culture. They each had their own particular peccadillos. They had these things that they believed, and they had these things that they didn't. You can see that reflected in the variation of the tale that is told about Jesus' life. Matthew's are written for the Ethiopian church. That was south of the mountains that separate Saharan Africa from sub-Saharan Africa. That was a whole different thing than Egypt, which was the closest to it. Those two accounts are different. It is almost certain that Mark was written first, that Matthew and Luke are a derivative from them, and John did his own thing. But it is almost a certainty, right? There is way too many coincidences between the life of Christ and what is explained in the Gnostic books. In addition to that, the best that we have is 120 years after the death of Christ. We have it written down, right? That's the best that we have. It may be a copy, it may not, but there is nothing really contemporary to the life of Christ. It was written probably the second generation after the death of Christ. And so there are many things in there that can be just dismissed. And I don't like really putting it that way, but it is true. But at least it was aligned correctly. At least it was trying to raise people up from a control system that was pretty horrible, right? Judaism was terrible. Beat this person in the head with a rock because they picked up a stick on the wrong day. That's one of the laws. If you rape this woman, you don't have to suffer any criminal punishments. Just pay her dad and marry her. It's perfectly fine. Those are some pretty horrible things, and it's not even the most horrible things that they had. That's not getting into the genocide that they committed when they took over the land twice. That's not considering many of the other absolutely terrible things that the kings did, right? That's not considering any of that. That's just going off of the beginning. But it appeared that Christ was, at least according to the story, was attempting to put an end to Judaism, right? He was putting an end to the blood sacrifice, and then they created a whole religion around a different blood sacrifice, which is pretty terrible. But if you look at the words of Christ as they are recorded, it is quite evident that he was trying to do away with what Judaism was doing, even though it is explicitly stated that he was not. Every one of the teachings was against what was current in the time for Judaism. Muhammad doesn't have that same caveat, right? At least they were trying to do something good. Muhammad was attempting to become exactly what he became, a religious figure. He took the writings of Judaism, he took the writings of Christianity, and he took the Hellenistic understandings of Gnosticism, and he merged them into something that is pretty terrible overall. And again, I haven't read through the entire Quran in a long time, right? I didn't even get through all of it when I did it. It was a long time ago, well over a decade, maybe even two. And so I am not read up on it, but the life of Muhammad was not marked by great. It was marked by bloody, it was marked by money, but it was not marked by great. And so they were intrinsically different in every single step along the way. Muhammad's beliefs and Christ's beliefs did not accord even in the slightest bit. And so while elaborate lives have been written by the devotees, once again, it was written for a target market. It was written explicitly to give a foundation for a religion. That is true for the Old Testament. That is true for the New Testament. That is true for the Quran. It was purpose written. It was probably not even divinely inspired. All right. Moses led a quiet life until his slaying of the Egyptian. He then flees into the land of Midian, and we hear nothing of what he did there. That is not entirely true. Yet immediately on his return, he turns the whole place upside down. Later on, too, he absents himself on Mount Sinai for a few days and comes back with the tables of the law in his hand. All right, well, let's do this one. This is why, I saw the word Moses and like, are we going to handle this part first? Moses did not write the Bible. That is another one of those almost guaranteed certainties. There is no recording of anything related to Moses, the story at all, that predates the Second Temple. The Second Temple, after the return from Babylonia. There is nothing in Kings or Chronicles that mentions Moses at all. It is entirely possible that the entirety of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy was invented wholesale in the time of the Second Temple. But even if it wasn't, right? Moses almost certainly did not live in Egypt. That story can be traced to another story farther back about a baby being put in a reed basket covered in pitch and set onto the waters. Right? That is something that was already existent. In addition to that, it is almost certain that he came from Midian. He was married to someone there. He worked for his father-in-law, who just happened to be a priest. Well, one thing that many people do not know, there were some great cities back in the day. Babylon was one of them. Alexandria was another one. Thebes was another one. And so was the land of Midian, right? I don't know what the city was, but the land of Midian had priests, and those priests were able to do miracles. They were able to throw their staff down on the ground and it turned to a snake. They were able to turn water into blood and all of these things, and that is probably where Moses learned them. It is almost certain that that is where he picked it up. There's a logic chain that allows this to happen, and we go through it in Exodus, but if Moses was actually born to this slave and put into a river, there is almost 0% chance that Pharaoh's daughter would see this child, decide to raise this child found in a basket in a river, and then go and get exactly the same mother to come and nurse it, right? Very, very, very slight possibility. For one, the Hebrews are going to be distinctive from the Egyptians. They will be able to tell the difference. I know some people won't like that, but it's true. Egyptians have different features than you see in Judaic peoples. In addition to that, right, it is almost certain that Pharaoh would not allow his daughter to do that. Another one of those points is if he did indeed kill this Egyptian and he ran away to Midian and he lived there for a while and he came back, when he comes back, there is a almost 0% chance that nobody's going to recognize him because he lived there. He was the son of the princess, the heir to the throne, right? Maybe not the heir, but... And so he comes back and there's a new Pharaoh, but that new Pharaoh is going to know him. There is a 0% chance that if the Pharaoh does not, the council attendants do. This was a guy that was raised in the house of the Pharaoh, killed someone, and then left. There is a 0% chance that somebody's not going to remember him coming back. In addition to that, right, you've got, after they leave, they cross the Red Sea, which is a whole different problem, right, where they stop in front of this God in particular, who opens up this pathway in particular, is a big deal. But they go to Midian, right? That's where they return to, and Jethro tells Moses to write the law. Jethro tells him to go up the mountain, which, by the way, the mountain is almost certainly going to be located in the land of Sinai, and it is not what we currently consider Sinai. I do have that explanation in the videos as well. There's a reason why I believe that. When they left Midian, they weren't guided by God. I know this is another one, but they were guided by the Midianites to the land of Israel. And that's not talking about when they went the first time and they got repulsed, right? They went to attempt to take over the area south of the Dead Sea, the Negev, and they got repulsed from that. And so they had to swing around to the east and go up to the side of the Dead Sea and take over those lands because they were less well defended. Well, the Midianites are the ones that led them that way. That is explicitly stated in the book. But it is overlooked because that was the point where they wandered in the desert for 40 years with 1 million people and animals, which seems highly likely, right? They were able to wander through the fucking desert. And I didn't, once again, this is not just some random, there's some fruit trees on the edge of the desert. This is deep in the middle of nothing desert. And you've got enough food for 1 million people. And yes, that is a fairly accurate number. Right? It was probably closer to 3, right? There was 600,000 fighting men, plus their wives, plus their children, right? You're looking at 1.5 million to 3 million easy, walking through the desert, and they're all able to eat. And that's before the manna from heaven, right? They got animals with them. What are the animals eating? Are the animals eating manna too? Is that what's going on? It breaks down at every single step, right? But Moses is not allowed to go into the promised land, but they do go take over this portion of what later becomes the promised land. It wasn't promised to him, but they got it anyway. And then they go down, right? And Moses, before he dies, sends Joshua back down south. And what do? They go and kill the Midianites. They eradicate the entire nation. That's what's recorded in the book. And that was the people that helped them. I wonder why maybe they killed those. And that's assuming that the story is true, and there is no reason to assume it is true. But they tell on themselves that they did horrible things. The genocide that they committed going in, the blood sacrifice that they had to do to start it, horrible. Absolutely horrible. They were serving a demon, and I do not equivocate about that. And so he went up the mountain, and he came back with the tables of the law, right? But honestly, that's not even how that happened either. But we're already getting long, so let's see if we can finish up the prelude. St. Paul, again, after his adventure on the road to Damascus, you know why I'm laughing if you've been here for a while, goes into the desert of Arabia for many years, and on his return, overturns the Roman Empire. Wow. Now that is something that I have not seen stated before. Is that true? Can you let me know is that true? Did Paul overturn the Roman Empire? It does not appear like, I'm pretty sure that it was Constantine in the Roman Empire who assumed Christianity like 150 years later. Maybe even 200, right? Like it was a significant amount of time. Paul wasn't there. Paul was long gone. Now, and again, that is assuming that Paul was a real figure, which is up for debate. But Paul is a real good reason why we can tie the Gnosticism with the New Testament. And if you are a Christian, this is going to upset you. Paul was in direct opposition to everybody who ever actually listened to Jesus speak. His experience with Jesus was exactly my experience with the divine. It was a personal revelation, right? There is no way of confirming or denying that this thing happened, but you can tell by fruit, and the fruit was not what Jesus taught. And that is explained in the Bible, right? Several times you see contention between that apostle and those other apostles. That is directly talking about a conflict between the teachings of Saint Paul and Saint Peter, the rock on whom the church was to be built. He was in direct opposition to Paul, and yet Paul is the definitive authority. He is the guy given credit for this, and he is the guy with more books in the New Testament than anybody else. Peter, the guy who was supposed to be the rock, doesn't have a gospel at all. I wonder if that was intentional. And again, I do not lend very much credence to the authority of Paul in that particular way. His experience was exactly the same as mine, which was a religious experience of a personal nature, so I cannot just discredit it, but you can tell by the fruit. Even in the legends of savages, we find the same thing universal. Somebody, who is nobody in particular, goes away for a longer or shorter period and comes back as the great medicine man. But nobody ever knows exactly what happened to him. This part is true. There is a certain period of exclusion that must happen for enlightenment. Now, I did not go on a sojourn. I did not isolate myself from people at all. I did receive spiritual revelation. That was due to meditative practices. Prayer, fasting, and meditation is pretty much all I do. I do move the energies, but that is a little bit attached to that particular process. And so I can do it externally. I do practice magic, but prayer, fasting, and meditation are the keys that unlock everything. And so it is entirely possible to do it without having to go into some great 40 days in the desert. It is. I can say that because I've done it. And so while these things may be helpful, that does not mean that they are intrinsic or necessary, and this might be implying that they are. Making every possible deduction for fable and myth, we get this one coincidence. A nobody goes away and comes back as somebody. This is not to be explained in any of the ordinary ways. Well, yes, but you are overlooking one other very key fact. There are many people that go away and do not come back as anybody. People have been isolating themselves, looking for spiritual illumination for as long as we have recorded history. Right? That was what Buddha was doing. He was looking for spiritual enlightenment underneath the fig tree. That is what most of the religious figures were doing, but there were many that just simply didn't make it. They did not become somebody. They go out, they do the thing, and maybe they die. Maybe they go out and they come back with no revelation at all. Maybe they go out, they come back with the wrong revelation. Maybe they go out and they don't come back with the ability to influence anybody. All of these things have happened, right? We know that these things have happened, that people have gone off into meditation and have come back in obscuration. That is a confirmable fact. And so, yeah, it can be explained in the ordinary ways, just simply through attrition, right? If you throw enough shit at the wall, something's going to stick. And so if enough people go out looking for enlightenment, some people will come back with it. That isn't undeniable. Some people are going to come back with it and they are going to relay it. That is a lot less likely, but still pretty reliable. And so it can absolutely be explained. There are many who go and do not come back with anything. There is not the smallest ground for the contention that these were from the start exceptional men. Now, that is if you completely dismiss everything that was relayed in the New Testament about Jesus, right? He, as a child, there was the whole star in the sky, which probably never happened. There was the exile to Egypt, which certainly did not happen. There was the Magi that came to give worship to him, right? All of those are grounds for contention that they were exceptional men from the start. Now, maybe not for Muhammad or Paul or any of the others, but for Jesus, you cannot make that argument. They made the argument that he was a divine child. They invented a whole prophecy about a virgin birth in order to justify that. And yes, that is stating something. And if you were unfamiliar, there was no prophecy of a virgin birth. Right? The prophet said, "Hey, king, give me a miracle that you want to see in order to prove that this is true." And the king's like, "Nope, not going to do it." God said not to test him. And the prophet's like, "I bet. You see this chick right here, this maiden? She's going to conceive and have a child. And by the time the child is eating curds, right, cheese, Babylon's going to come in and take you into exile." And that is exactly what happened. The prophecy was given, and it was relayed and done in exactly the way that it was given. It was fulfilled. It was not virgin, it was maiden. Those are two separate things. It was talking about one specific maiden, not another one a couple thousand years in the future. It was not talking about a virgin birth at all. And that is directly from the text. That is like, you can look at the New Testament, and the New Testament's like, yes, look at this prophecy. And then you go back and you look at the prophecy, and the prophecy does not say that at all. Now, in addition, there is no, Jesus went to Egypt because of the genocide. The Romans were really good for making records, and those records included the horrible things that they did. They justified them in the records, but they kept records. There is no record of this genocide. Right, this killing of the firstborn child. None. In the exact same way that there is no record of an eclipse or a darkening of the sun when Jesus was crucified. Right? There is no independent corroboration outside of the book that was written to create a religion. None. Not a single reference from anyone. There are astrological references that corroborate across the globe for everything, except this one particular thing that was kind of important. And again, Rome recorded shit like that. Like, it was not something that would just pass by and not, if they had killed these criminals and then there was an eclipse, they would have definitely recorded that, and there is no record of that whatsoever. And so there is plenty of reason for contention that the veracity of that book, but there is not, like, you cannot say that there is not the smallest ground of contention from the start that they were exceptional men. Again, this is a lie. Muhammad would hardly have driven a camel until he was 35 years old if he had possessed any talent or ambition. Even me, with my limited knowledge, knows better than that. St. Paul had much original talent, but he is the least of the five, nor do they seem to have possessed any of the usual materials for power such as rank, fortune, or influence. Moses was rather a big man in Egypt when he left. He came back as a mere stranger. Christ had not been to China and married the emperor's daughter. What? At what point do we have that as a legend? At what point do we have... Like, this is a legend. Moses was a big man. He was the Pharaoh's child, right? He was adopted by the house of Pharaoh, who just promptly forgot him when he left after killing someone. Christ had not been to China and married the emperor's daughter. Now, I have heard rumors that Christ was married. I have heard rumors that he had children, the Rosicrucian legends attached to that. I've heard all of those things. There's no real provable veracity to that. But I've never heard this, right? I've heard that he went to the Orient. I've heard that he went to India. I've heard that he went to Egypt. I've heard that he went to Ireland. I've heard that he came to the New World, right? This is the first time I've ever heard that he went to China and married the emperor's daughter. Muhammad had not been acquiring wealth and drilling soldiers because he was an incompetent. Buddha had not been consolidating any religious organizations. St. Paul had not been intriguing with an ambitious general. Each came back poor. Each came back alone. What is the nature of their power? What happened to them in their absence? History will not help us solve the problem, for history is silent. We have only the accounts given by the men themselves. But we don't even have that. It would be very remarkable should we find that these accounts agree. One of the great teachers we have mentioned, Christ, is silent. The other four tell us something, some more, some less. There is a reason why, right? If this was indeed hidden Gnosticism being relayed in a new way, they had rules about talking about it too openly, and so there may be things that were withheld from you. Although he does tell you, pray, fast, and meditate. Buddha goes into detail too elaborate to enter upon in this place, but the gist of it is that in one way or another he got hold of the secret force of the world and mastered it. I'm there. And mastery is I'm not claiming mastery, right? But I am at least an adept. I have at least healed myself. Of St. Paul's experiences, we have nothing but a casual allusion to his having been caught up into heaven and seen and heard things of which it was not lawful to speak. Muhammad speaks crudely of his having been visited by the angel Gabriel, who communicated things from God. Moses says that he beheld God. If you have seen it, it is not God. God is the entirety of everything all at once, and you have not seen everything all at once, ever. Diverse as these statements are at first sight, all agree in announcing an experience of the class which 50 years ago would have been called supernatural, today may be called spiritual, and 50 years hence will have a proper name based on an understanding of the phenomena which occurred. Theorists have not been at a loss to explain, but they differ. The Mohammedan insists that God is and did really send Gabriel with messages for Muhammad, but all others contradict him, and from the nature of the case, proof is impossible. I have been visited by an angel. I've relayed the story several times. It is not all that impressive. I wasn't given some great knowledge from that. I did have a different experience later, but the angel just kind of appeared to me. I was not a Christian at the time, and he told me that I would spread the word of God, and I ran from that for a good 20 years. But that was the entirety of it. Right? I remember the being, but I don't remember features. I remember the voice, but it's not something that was audible. And I got no name. Like, it did not identify itself. It did not say, do not be afraid. I didn't feel afraid. There is this thing that happens, right? There are entities, I do believe. I just relayed one of the reasons why I believe that, but I do believe that there are entities that are aligned for the betterment of humankind, and there are entities that are aligned for the detriment of humankind, each one of them serving their purpose to keep humanity perpetually growing. Now, that is not to say that they are responsible for your decisions, but there are definitely things that can tempt you. These entities have a tendency, some of them show up and they're beautiful and everybody loves them. And then some of them show up and they're quite horrible and they have to say, be not afraid. And generally speaking, from what I have read, if it says, be not afraid, it's probably one of the entities aligned with the detriment of humankind. That is proved through the actions, right? The one shows up and he's like, hey, go kill your kid. And then another one shows up and he's like, don't kill your kid. One of them was, don't be afraid. One of them was not. And there was a countenance. I don't know Gabriel. I don't know this story. But if he came in saying, do not be afraid, it would explain a lot of the things about the Mohammedanism. The lack of proof has been so severely felt by Christianity and, in a much less degree, by Islam, that fresh miracles have been manufactured almost daily to support the tottering structure. Modern thought, rejecting these miracles, has adopted theories involving epilepsy and madness, as if organization could spring from disorganization. Even if epilepsy were the cause of these great movements, which have caused civilization after civilization to arise from barbarism, it would merely form an argument for cultivating epilepsy. Of course, great men will never conform with the standards of little men, and he whose mission it is to overturn the world can hardly escape the title of revolutionary. The fads of a period always furnish terms of abuse. The fads of Caiaphas was Judaism, and the Pharisees told him that Christ blasphemed. Pilate was a loyal Roman, and they accused Christ of sedition. When the Pope had all power, it was necessary to prove an enemy a heretic. Advancing today towards a medical oligarchy, we try to prove that our opponents are insane, and, in a Puritan country, to attack their morals. We should then avoid all rhetoric and try to investigate with perfect freedom from bias the phenomena which occurred to these great leaders of mankind. There is no difficulty in our assuming that these men themselves did not understand clearly what happened to them. The only one who explains this system thoroughly is Buddha, and Buddha is the only one that is not dogmatic. That is probably a link. We may also suppose that the others thought it inadvisable to explain too clearly to their followers. St. Paul evidently took this line. Our best document will therefore be the system of Buddha. Footnote. We have the documents of Hinduism and of two Chinese systems, but Hinduism has no single founder. Lao Tse is one of our best examples of a man who went away and had a mysterious experience, perhaps the best of all examples, as his system is the best of all systems. We have full details of his method of training in the Kong-Kang-King and elsewhere, but it is so little known that we shall admit consideration of it in this popular account. But it is so complex that no immediate summary will serve, and in the case of the others, we have not the accounts of the masters, we have those of their immediate followers, at best. The methods advised by all of these people have a startling resemblance to one another. They recommend virtue of various kinds, solitude, absence of excitement, moderation in diet, and finally a practice which some call prayer and meditation. Prayer, fasting, and meditation, right there. The former four may turn out on examination to be mere conditions favorable to the last. Now, absence of excitement, moderation in diet, right? That is fasting. Solitude is fasting as well, right? Fasting is not just denying yourself this one thing. It can be denying yourself sexual pleasure. It can be denying yourself entertainment, right? That is fasting. That is removing yourself from the temptation so that you can get a better understanding. The way I do fasting is that I generally will set out a specified time period. It is normally around 3 days, but it is not always that. Sometimes it is purpose-driven, and I will fast until I receive the answer that I'm looking for. That generally comes faster than 3 days. But fasting to me is preparation. It is allowing the stillness so that you can hear. Prayer is you actively asking for things, right? Actively aligning your energies in the right ways. Meditation is silence. It is complete isolation from thoughts. That is a process which takes time to master. Most people are not able to do it right away. But fasting removes hunger, like it doesn't remove hunger, but it removes satiety. And that allows you to hear a little bit better. Removing yourself from excitement is going to do the same thing. Moderation in diet, fasting, right? And so prayer, fasting, and meditation is intrinsic to everything that I do. The way that I just explained that is exactly why is it intrinsic, right? You ask and set the intentions. Fasting allows you to hear back, and meditation is when you actually hear back. It is not you actively pursuing thoughts. It's not you moving energies, right? It is you eliminating the thoughts until the divine inspiration comes. On investigating what is meant by these two things, we find that they are only one. For what is the state of either prayer or meditation? I just define those definitively, right? Prayer is the active state of asking for. Meditation is the denial of thought. It is removing your thoughts so that the divine can communicate back. It is intrinsically different. The processes are different. The understanding is different. Everything that you do in the process is different. Is it the restraining of the mind to a single act, state, or thought? That would be closer to meditation than it would be to prayer. If we sit down quietly and investigate the contents of our mind, we shall find that even at the best of times, the principal characteristics are wandering and distraction. I am not surprised to find that from him. Right? Judging by the benefits of his life, we have seen that he did not have the path to enlightenment. And here is some proof of that. There is a mental discipline that is required to do these things. You should be able to focus your thoughts in such a way that the wandering distractions do not play a part. That is something that is attainable, at least through my own personal experience. It does take time. It is something that you have to intentionally set out to do. Anyone who has had anything to do with children and untrained minds generally know that fixity of attention is never present, even when there is a large amount of intelligence and goodwill. That's going to depend on a lot of factors, right? The things that we call autism, I don't, but the things that we call that were existent then. Hyperfixation was a thing, even for children, even then. Granted, it is not the natural state, the normal flow of things, but it did exist. If then we, with our well-trained minds, determine to control this wandering thought, we shall find that we are fairly well able to keep the thoughts running in a narrow channel, each thought linked to the last in a perfectly rational manner. But if we attempt to stop this current, we shall find that, so far from succeeding, we shall merely bread down the banks of the channel. The mind will overflow, and instead of a chain of thought, we shall have the chaos of confused images. This mental activity is so great, and seems so natural, that it is hard to understand how anyone first got the idea that it was a weakness and a nuisance. Perhaps it is because in the more natural practice of devotion, people found that their thoughts interfered. In any case, calm and self-control are to be preferred to restlessness. Darwin, in his study, presents a marked contrast with a monkey in a cage. Generally speaking, the larger and stronger and more highly developed any animal is, the less does it move about. And such movements as it does make are slow and purposeful. Compare the ceaseless activity of bacteria with the reasoned steadiness of the beaver. You mean busy like a beaver? Is that what you were referring to as being reasoned steadiness? And except in the few animal communities which are organized, such as bees, the greatest intelligence is shown by those of solitary habits. This is so true of man that psychologists have been obliged to treat the mental state of crowds as if it were a totally different in quality from any state possible to an individual. Okay, so that is in part true, right? The greatest intelligence is shown by those of solitary habits. That is an outflow, right? If you are intelligent, and most people aren't, we've already established that, It is hard to hang around with stupid people, right? It is really hard to hang around with somebody who is negative all day. It is really hard to hang around with somebody who is always looking at the bad side of things. It is hard to hang out with somebody who has the exact wrong understanding of things all of the time. And so if you have a propensity for being more intelligent, being able to think a little bit clearer, you are naturally going to isolate yourself from idiots. That is just something that you are going to naturally do. Not even in a malicious way, but concentrating around that energy is going to reflect upon you. You are the sum of what you can surround yourself with. And so, yes, this is in part true. And also, obliged to treat the mental state of crowds as if it were a totally different in quality from any state possible to an individual is also a true statement. And you can see this in mob mentality. If there is a situation in which there is a protest and then one person throws a brick or breaks a window, that leads to a greater escalation of these things. That is a mob mentality. People in groups tend to mob. That is because we are not solitary animals. We are intrinsically linked to community. It is intrinsic to our health and happiness. Being isolated is not going to lead to a productive full life in the manner in which we are probably intended to live it. Some people are absolutely called to a completely solitary existence. They are generally the ones that nobody wants to hang around. And so they are either mentally ill, they have disgusting habits, or they are not capable of intelligent thought and nobody wants to be around them. And so this is true, right? But what is being relayed here is not, right? The overarching here is that it is better for man to be isolated, and that's not true. It is better for you to be surrounded with a community of like-minded individuals, and that is not to exclude new thoughts or new understandings, but to be surrounded by people with the same goals as you, to be surrounded by people who think on the same level as you, is just a naturally intrinsic thing that you need, right? That is why stupid people tend to cluster together and intelligent people tend to cluster together as well. It is not because humanity is intrinsically solitary. We are the opposite of that. Humanity is intrinsically community-based. You can tell by the cities that we have, right? The shared accommodations that we make, the respect that we give to one another. Those are all intrinsic to us. All right. It is by freeing the mind from external influences, whether casual or emotional, that it obtains power to see somewhat of the truth of things. Let us, however, continue our practice. Let us determine to be masters of our mind. We shall, then, soon find what conditions are favorable. That I agree with. Continue the practice. Determine how to be the master of your mind. Absolutely. Prayer, fasting, and meditation. There will be no need to persuade ourselves at great length that all external influences are likely to be unfavorable. All external influences are not likely to be unfavorable. There will be several that are favorable. New faces, new scenes will disturb us. That says something about you. Even the new habits of life in which we undertake for the very purpose of controlling the mind will at first tend to upset it. Still, we must give up our habit of eating too much and follow the natural rule of only eating when we are hungry, listening to the interior voice which tells us that we have had enough. This is something that I actually do. Right? Outside of the fasting thing, I only eat if I'm hungry. Right? And that's generally one time a day, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon going into the evening. It's not something that I intentionally set out to do. I've been doing it for better than a decade. It is just something that I do. If I'm not hungry, I do not force myself to eat. I'm not going to go and have breakfast just because it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm not going to go and have lunch just because it's noon. I am going to eat when I am hungry. I do not restrict myself to only one meal a day, which is what the people that follow the diet do, right? This isn't a dogma. It is just me following the natural rule of my body. If I am hungry, I will eat. If that's 6 o'clock in the morning, I'll go eat a snack, right? I don't generally eat large meals except for once a day, and Sometimes that is just simply because I know that I need to, right? Sometimes I'm not hungry and I do still eat, but for the most part, my dietary patterns have definitely changed over the last decade. I have given up the habit of eating too much. I only eat when I'm hungry. I listen to my interior voice when dealing with that. It is something that I also recommend to other people, right? And up to this as well. Stop eating when you're full. If you get a plate, you don't have to finish it. I know that's a wild concept. If you're at a restaurant, you can bring it home and eat it later, right? If you're at home, well, save it for leftovers. But you don't have to finish the plate simply because it's on your plate. That leads to overconsumption. If you get full, quit eating. It really is that simple. The same rule applies to sleep. We have determined to control our minds, and so our time for meditation must take precedence of other hours. Right? I get 8 hours of sleep. That is fairly consistent with, well, actually these days I get about 7 because my body has this, like, I don't have an alarm clock. I have not had an alarm clock in 20 years. I have always been able to internally set an alarm and wake up. These days I can't change it. Right? It wakes me up without any consent from me. I don't set the time anymore. These days I'm getting up at 3:30. That normally happens right before the equinox, whenever the time is about to change. But we're early this year. Like for the last month or so, it's been 3:30 every morning. It's quite annoying. And like, I can't go back to sleep. Laying there just makes you feel like shit. It's time to get up and get the day started. But you should be endeavoring to have a regular sleep, right? The same hours is generally preferable. And making sure that it is enough sleep. If you have to nap during the day, then you're probably doing something wrong. We must fix times for practice and make our feasts movable. In order to test our progress, we shall find that, as in all physiological matters, meditation cannot be gauged by feelings. We shall have a notebook and pencil, and we shall also have a watch. We shall then endeavor to count how often during the first quarter of an hour the mind breaks from the idea upon which it is determined to concentrate. That is a horrible way to do it. That is focusing upon the thing which is holding you back. That is what you are doing here, right? If you are counting how many times this interruption happens, you are focusing on the interruption. That is exactly the wrong way to do it, right? When the interruptions come, and they will, dismiss them. Do not try to keep track of them. That is going to be much more effective, I promise you. We shall practice this twice daily, and as we go, experience will teach us which conditions are favorable and which are not. Before we have been doing this for very long, we are almost certain to get impatient, and we shall find that we have to practice many other things in order to assist us in our work. New problems will constantly arise which must be faced and solved. For instance, we shall most assuredly find that we fidget. We shall discover that no position is comfortable even though we never noticed it before in all our lives. The difficulty has been solved by a practice called asana, which will be described later on. Memories of the event of the day will bother us. We must arrange our day so that it is absolutely uneventful. That is probably stupid, right? Your day should be full, right? That is not to say that it should be so full that you can never have recreation, because recreation is important. Recreation is an activity that you should plan for. But you are meant to work. You are meant to work hard. You are not meant to just sit around idly all day. That is a truth about humanity. We are machines. The machines work better when we exercise the machines. You should be doing so. You should be getting stimulation both intellectually and emotionally. You should be getting physical stimulation. You should be using your body. You should be using your mind. You should be associating with other people. You should be friendly, right? All of that is absolutely opposed to being absolutely uneventful, right? There is no amount of spiritual gain that will benefit you in that, right? And that is, again, I do not speak idly. This is something that I do have a small degree of expertise upon. I have done things. It can be useful to remove yourself into a period of isolation, but that should not be your life, right? You should not be arranging your day on a regular basis to be uneventful. You should be engaged in things mentally stimulating and physically stimulating in your life. They are intrinsic to your health. Our minds will recall to us our hopes and fears, our loves and hates, our ambitions, our envies, and many other emotions. All these must be cut off. We must have absolutely no interest in life but that of quieting our minds. And again, you are doing it exactly wrong. You have emotions, you have feelings, and you are meant to. They are all valid. They all have a purpose in your life. They all serve a purpose. Every single emotion that you feel. And if you are in a period where you are attempting to go into meditation and your mind keeps getting disrupted by a particular emotion, that means that you are meant to investigate that emotion so that you can progress further. Right? If you are feeling sadness, for instance, you should go back and find out why you are feeling sad. That should be the exercise that you are doing from the moment that you recognize that this feeling keeps recurring. That is shadow work. That is digging into what is holding you back from progress, root causing it, and removing those roots. For instance, right, I've already mentioned that I had somewhat of a rough life. Again, the origin story holds the details if you are interested, but there are several things that I could be dwelling upon, right? Now, in the state where I was learning to meditate, it was quite often that some of these events would recur to me, and it was necessary for me to go back and root cause them. One of the things, right, this is a trigger for people, so if you are easily triggered, you're probably not here, but I was raped as a child. Right? I had to go back and root cause that. Now, there is a lot to that. I believe that we are here for lessons. One of those lessons I was here to demonstrate for this particular person was to overcome the temptation for the thing that happened, right? That is not, I made a decision as a child to be raped. It was on a soul level, I decided to be the temptation for him to choose to overcome the temptation. But he did not, right? I had to go back and root cause that. And I had to understand that it was not me, right? Even on a soul level, that's a whole different thing. It was not a conscious choice that I made. It was not something that I invited into my life. It was something that happened to me. And the emotions that come from that are perfectly valid. You should feel anger. You should feel sorrow. And you should allow yourself to feel those in the moment when they come to you. Now, that's not always possible. If you are angry and you're out in a crowd, it's probably a good idea to restrain your anger. If you are a man, at least, and it's a sorrowful situation, you might not be comfortable with shedding tears. You should be, but you may not be. And so you can deny those emotions for a time, but you should go home and feel those emotions. If it is a sad situation, you should cry about it. You should be mature enough in your masculinity that you understand this is releasing a toxic emotion. You should go back and understand why you felt that emotion. You should not cut it off. This is intrinsic. This is one of those things that will hold you back from spiritual progress. If you are not allowing your emotions to be your emotions, you are denying a part of yourself, and there is nothing that is going to allow you to perform magic from that. This is the object of the usual monastic vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Yeah, see, those are all pride. There is no reason, and by no, I don't mean for everybody, but for 98% of the population, there is no reason for a vow of chastity, poverty, or even obedience. Obedience is a little bit lesser, right? Because you are submitting yourself to an authority. That is something you can voluntarily do. You can voluntarily take up poverty or chastity, but it is pointless. It does nothing to spiritually advance you. It does nothing to magically advance you. Right? Now, that is not to say that you should give in to debauchery like we saw in yesterday's video, because that leads to exactly the outcome we saw in yesterday's video. But you should find a partner to be not chaste with. You should have things. You should not give away everything. That is an unbalanced life. And for most of them, right, most of the people who take this up, it is a pride issue. You are submitting to a sin. I am better than you because I took up a vow of chastity. That is literally how most of them think. I am better than you because I took up a vow of poverty. Is literally how they think. That is pride all the way through. You're not better than anybody because you give away everything. You're not. It is simple as. You are not better than anyone because you've never had sex. You're not. It is simple as. If you have no property, you have no care, nothing to be anxious about. With chastity, no other person to be anxious about and to distract your attention. While if you are vowed to obedience, the question of what you are to do no longer frets. You simply obey. This is giving away your free will. This is giving away your growth potential. This is exactly wrong. And I do not say that lightly. That is not something that I say very often at all. There are a great many other obstacles which you will discover as you go on, and it is proposed to deal with these in turn, but let us pass by for the moment to the point where you are nearing success. In your early struggles, you may have found it difficult to conquer sleep. You may have wandered so far from the object of your meditations, without noticing it, that the meditation has really been broken. But much later on, when you feel that you are getting quite good, you will be shocked to find a complete oblivion of yourself and your surroundings. You will say, "Good heavens, I must have been asleep," or else, "What on earth was I meditating upon?" or even, "What was I doing? Where am I? Who am I?" Or a merely wordless bewilderment may daze you. This may alarm you, and your alarm will not be lessened when you come to full consciousness and reflect that you have actually forgotten who you are and what you are doing. Okay, now this is true, right? When you get to the point where you have dealt with the emotions, where you can quiet your thoughts, you will be surprised. It is true. You'll be like, "Oh, I did it." Right? It will completely bewilder you. You will be amazed by it. It does happen. Right? It did to me, at least. Right? This is only one of the many adventures that may come to you, but it is the one most typical. By this time, your hours of meditation will fill most of the day, and you will probably be constantly having presentiments that something is about to happen. There has been no period in this by which most of my day has been filled with meditation. At most, I have meditated for an hour at a time, and that is stretching it. It is normally 20 to 30 minutes. I can do everything that I need to do. I've achieved the state in which meditation actually occurs, and then for 20 or 30 minutes I am there, and that's it. There is no constant state of it. I do have presentiments that things will happen sometimes. Nothing that I've written down and tracked to the point where I would put it out publicly to be verified or anything, but I have had things I was like, "Oh yeah, that's about to happen," and then it does. So, but there has been 0 points in time in which my entire day was taken up by meditation. That is a waste of your day, right? You're not gonna be able to concentrate in the proper way all day long. It's just simply not going to happen. Your mind is not built that way. You may achieve some brief periods of doing it correctly. Those are the ones that you need. And when that is done, that is when you need to stop, right? You may also be terrified with the idea that your brain may be giving way, but you will have learned the real symptoms of mental fatigue, and you will be careful to avoid them. They must be very carefully distinguished from idleness. At certain times, you will feel as if there was a contest between the will and the mind, and at other times, you may feel as if they are in harmony. That is true. But there is a third state to be distinguished from the latter feeling. It is the certain sign of near success, the view halou. This is when the mind runs naturally towards the object chosen, not as if in obedience to the will of the owner of the mind, but as if directed by nothing at all or by something impersonal, as if it were falling by its own weight and not being pushed down. Almost always, the moment that one becomes conscious of this, it stops, and the dreary old struggle between the cowboy will and the buck jumper mind begins again. The mind runs naturally towards the object chosen. That is a small degree of obsession, right? OCD-ish type behavior. And again, OCD is highly overrated, just like autism, but right, that is being fascinated with the idea of the subject. That does not necessarily imply spiritual enlightenment, right? I'm not sure if I am misunderstanding what is being said here, but I don't think that I am, right? Once again, meditation is deadness, right? It is you without the thoughts, allowing the divine's thoughts to come to you, the divine's instructions to come to you. Most of the things that I consider divinely revealed, they come through intuition in that state, right? It is not an audible voice of God telling me this is the overlay, right? It was a divine revelation that revealed to me that the 8 cognitive functions overlaid with the 8 human chakras. And it works. And so, runs naturally towards the object chosen, right? That's going to be on the prayer side of it, not on the meditation side of it. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect here. And again, they don't understand that there is a difference between prayer and meditation, so that's automatically going to be a disconnect. Runs naturally towards the object chosen, right? That is just like fascination, at least in my understanding. Like every other physiological process, consciousness of it implies disorder or disease. In analyzing the nature of this work of controlling the mind, the student will appreciate without trouble the fact that 2 things are involved: the person seeing and the thing seen, the person knowing and the thing known, and he will come to regard this as the necessary condition of all consciousness. We are too accustomed to assume to be facts, things about which we have no real right, even to guess. Say that again. We assume, for example, that the unconscious is the torpid, and yet nothing is more certain than that the bodily organs which are functioning well do so in silence. The best sleep is dreamless, even in the case of games or skill, or the very best strokes are followed by the thought, I don't know how I did it. And we cannot repeat those strokes at will. The moment we begin to think consciously about a stroke, we get nervous and are lost. This is the unconscious mind, right? The unconscious mind is able to process things that you cannot, right? With the example that I like to use, I got from, it wasn't The Wise Man's Fears, the first book by Rothfuss. When he was talking about the unconscious mind, and if I was to pick up an object, right? Say it's the lighter. And I tell you, I'm going to throw this lighter. I'm going to use this much force. I want you to use calculation to understand where this lighter is going to fall. You're going to have a hard time doing that. The math is not going to be consistent. It will show different locations due to different variables, right? The length of my arm, where I release it, all kinds of things. But if you were standing over there and I just took this lighter and threw at you, your unconscious mind will reach out and grab it. It is able to comprehend something that you cannot, right? That is this. That is being in the zone. And sports people will tell you when they're playing their best, they're in the zone, right? It is when it is happening and it's flawless. It's seamless. It just flows. And you may have been in that state. I have several times in my life where everything just lines up. You know exactly how it's going to go and it's just in the zone, right? I don't know how I did it. That's exactly right. And you can mess it up by getting too nervous by thinking about it. Right? If you're thinking about, I've got to catch this ball, you're probably going to miss the ball. But if you just allow it to come and you snap, your hand will take care of it. Down to the point, right, if you got a baseball glove on, down to the point that you can differentiate subconsciously, automatically, that you need to catch it in the pouch and not on your palm. In fact, there are 3 main classes of stroke. Wait, what? We cannot repeat that. Okay. The bad stroke, which we associate, and rightly, with wandering attention. The good stroke, which we associate, and rightly, with fixed attention. And the perfect stroke, which we do not understand, which is really caused by the habit of fixity of attention having become independent of the will, and thus unable to act freely of its own accord. This is how I shield myself, right? That's what this is describing. I am shielded all of the time. It was not a process, right? That it was not that at the beginning of the process. It was something that I had to intentionally do, right? I had to intentionally pull the energies, put them out into the appropriate locations, and they would do their thing. It is not something that I have to maintain nowadays. It happens automatically. I am constantly emitting a shield. I am constantly in the process of grounding myself. It is something that I do intrinsically now. It is through habit and force of repetition. And so that's what's being described here, right? You start off, you have to focus on it. You're not good at it. That's the bad stroke. Then you get good at focusing on it. That's the good stroke. And then it happens without you thinking about it. That's the intrinsic stroke. Now, you can also look at this as driving a car down the interstate, right? The first couple of times you drive to a location, you're very much aware of where you're going. You're paying attention to the GPS these days, but you're paying attention to where you're going. Once you get used to it, you can drive there. You're still conscious of it. But after you've worked at a place for, say, 3 or 4 months, right? And you're making the same drive 5 times a week, you'll get to the point where you forget large sections of that. You drive it without even thinking about it. You miss the potholes, you make the curves, you adjust in traffic, and you've never thought about it at all. That is this in demonstration. This is the same phenomenon referred to above as being a good sign. Finally, something happens whose nature may form the subject of a further discussion later on. For the moment, let it suffice to say that this consciousness of the ego and the non-ego, the seer and the seen and the thing seen, the knower and the thing known, is blotted out. There is usually an intense light, an intense sound, and a feeling of such overwhelming bliss that the resources of language have been exhausted again and again in the attempt to describe it. And this is true as well. There is a light. You can be sitting in a dark room and you will get the light revealed to you. I have done, as part of the Esoterica, but it's got its own playlist, The Golden Flower. I forget the author's name. It's like Haynell, I think. Maybe that was different. It's The Golden Flower, right? I've done the study on it, and we discovered in there this, right? This is absolutely a truth. There is a golden flower that will unfold. It has not been auditory for me. There was no intense sound. There is a feeling of bliss that is associated with it, and there is an intense light, but the intense sound is not for me. Maybe it is for you. I don't know. Yeah, but this is definitely a thing. And if you're interested, the golden flower will get you there. It is an absolute knockout blow to the mind. It is so vivid and tremendous that those who experience it are in the gravest danger of losing all sense of proportion. By its light, all other events in life are as darkness. Owing to this, people have utterly failed to analyze it or to estimate it. They are accurate enough in saying that. Compared with this, all human life is absolutely dross. But they go further and go wrong. They argue that, since this is that which transcends the terrestrial, it must be celestial. That is definitely one of the assumptions that is made, and it is probably not a good one. Right? That is not to say that it is necessarily wrong, but making the assumption is. One of the tendencies in their minds has been the hope of a heaven such as their parents and teachers have described, or that they have themselves pictured, and without the slightest grounds for saying so, they make the assumption, this is that. In the Bhagavad Gita, a vision of this class is naturally attributed to the apparition of Vishnu, who was the local god of the period. Anna Kingsford, who dabbled in Hebrew mysticism and was a feminist. How do those two things go together? Got an almost identical vision, but called the divine figure which she saw alternately Adonai and Maria. Now this woman, though handicapped by a brain that was a mass of putrid pulp and a complete lack of social status, education, and moral character, did more in the religious world than any other person had done for generations. She, and she alone, made theosophy possible, and without theosophy, the worldwide interest in similar matters would never have been aroused. This interest is to the law of Thelema what the preaching of John the Baptist was to Christianity. Who is this? I'm going to pop this out so that I can look her up later. We're not going to do it now, but I'm definitely going to look her up later. We are now in a position to say what happened to Muhammad. Somehow or another, his phenomena happened in his mind. More ignorant than Anna Kingford, though fortunately more moral. Debatable. He connected it with the story of the Annunciation, which he had undoubtedly heard in his boyhood, and said, "Gabriel appeared to me." And, right, you cannot say that somebody is more moral. I mean, maybe he's more moral than Anna Kingsford, but, like, he literally married a child. So, there's that. And that's not even taking into account all the throw people off a building stuff. But in spite of his ignorance, his total misconception of the truth, the power of the vision was such that he was enabled to persist through the usual persecution and founded a religion which, even today, 1 man in every 8 belongs. I believe it is higher than that now. It's like a quarter of the planet. And that's my understanding. I can be wrong, so don't quote me on the numbers. The history of Christianity shows precisely the same remarkable fact. Jesus Christ was brought up on the fables of the Old Testament and was so compelled to ascribe his experiences to Jehovah, although his gentle spirit could have nothing in common with the monster who was always commanding the rape of virgins and the murder of little children, and whose rites were then and still are celebrated by human sacrifice. I am in perfect accordance with that description. If you are unaware, I am in perfect accordance with that. The human sacrifice was a horrible thing. Blood sacrifice in every particular instance was a horrible thing. The genocide that the Jews did to take over the land of Israel, horrible things. The execution of the people of Midian, horrible things. There is horrible things all the way through the entirety of the book. And so the demon, that was Jehovah, the entity aligned with the detriment of humankind, is probably Baal. Footnote. The massacres of the Jews in Eastern Europe, which surprise the ignorant, are almost invariably excited by the disappearance of Christian children, stolen, as the parents suppose, for the purposes of ritual murder. W.E.H. footnote. This unfortunate perpetuation of the blood libel myth was later recanted by Crowley. The blood libel was visited upon early Christians by the Romans and is visited today upon the Thelemites by Christian fundamentalists. Okay, so he recanted this because of this, right? He practiced blood magic. He did not have an intrinsic problem with it, right? He committed human sacrifice, even if it was himself. You don't have to die for a sacrifice to be there, right? Sacrificing blood in any manner is intrinsically wrong. This, right, I'm glad that they corrected the footnote because there is nothing intrinsic to Judaism that leads to human sacrifice, right? They did it with animals. That is intrinsically bad as well, but not as bad as humans. At least they ate the body, right? At least there was that. But there was no intrinsic forgiveness of sin that comes from killing anything ever. And so that is going to be intrinsically wrong in every particular instance. And I do not accord with the blood cult of Judaism whatsoever. Not even with the blood cult that is Christianity anymore. So, and that is reviewing the Bible, but I do not tolerate religious or racial slander, right? There are definitely things in there that are not good. They are intrinsically opposed to the betterment of humanity even. But they were not killing children in this way, right? There is the whole sacrifice to Baal that many of them participated in. That happened and is recorded, so there is that. But this blood libel, I don't play with that, right? I don't blame a whole group of people for the actions of a few. For any of them, that includes the Masons and governments, right? So, similarly, the visions of Joan of Arc were entirely Christian, but she, like all the others we have mentioned, found somewhere the force to do great things. Of course, it may be said that there is a fallacy in the argument. It may be true that all these great people saw God, but it does not follow that everyone who sees God will do great things. This is true enough. In fact, the majority of people who claim to have seen God, and who no doubt did see God, just as much as those whom we have quoted, did nothing else. I discussed that earlier. But perhaps their silence is not a sign of their weakness, but of their strength. Perhaps these great men are the failures of humanity. Perhaps it would be better to say nothing. Perhaps only an unbalanced mind would wish to alter anything or believe in the possibility of altering anything. But there are those who think existence, even in heaven, intolerable, so long as there is one single being who does not share that joy. There are some who may wish to travel back from the very threshold of the bridal chamber to assist belated guests. Such, at least, was the attitude which Gautama Buddha adopted, nor shall he be alone. Again, it may be pointed out that the contemplative life is generally opposed to the active life, and it must require an extremely careful balance to prevent the one absorbing the other. Remember I told you should not be absorbed in meditation all day? This is a direct contradiction to what you just told us to do. As it will be seen later, the vision of God, or union of God, or samadhi, or whatever we may agree to call it, has many kinds and many degrees, although there is an impassable abyss between the least of them and the greatest of all the phenomena of normal consciousness. To sum up, we assert a secret source of energy which explains the phenomena of genius. Footnote: we have dealt in this preliminary sketch only with the examples of religious genius. The other kind are subject to the same remarks, but the limit of our space forbids discussion of these. We do not believe in any supernatural explanations, but insist that this source may be reached by following out of definite rules, the degree of success depending upon the capacity of the seeker and not upon the favor of any divine being. We assert that the critical phenomena which determines success is an occurrence in the brain characterized essentially by the uniting of subject and object. We propose to discuss this phenomena, analyze its nature, determine accurately the physical, mental, and moral conditions which are favorable to it, to ascertain its cause, and thus to produce it in ourselves, so that we may adequately study its effects. And that is why we are here. That's going to bring us to the end of the prologue. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. The stances that I make and the clarifications that I give, I feel like I have to, right? I am at least called to that, right? The assertion that I am part of the Order of Melchizedek appears to be that. It is not a bloodline thing. I know that there are other people associating themselves with the bloodline of David. Melchizedek definitely preceded that bloodline. Definitely preceded that bloodline. Definitely preceded Abraham's bloodline. Definitely. And so, while I don't have a whole lot extra to offer about the Order of Melchizedek other than I am in it, it does appear that one of the things that I am to do is to dispense the things that I have learned, right? Now, that was given to me during a meditative experience. I am not free to induct anyone. I am not a leader of that, right? It is just something that I was told I was a part of by a divine experience. Take it with a grain of salt. That's fine. As far as I know, there is nobody else involved. But at least to me, it is something that I feel like I am called to do. It is something that I feel like is necessary. There were a few kernels of good information in here, but for the most part, this is leading down the wrong path, and it is already something that you can determine, right? There is some truth here, we can tell, but a lot of this is going to be unnecessary. We'll put it that way. It starts from a misunderstanding, right? Now, my understanding might not be the right one, but I have to stand with it, and it makes logical sense, prayer and meditation being separated in the way that I do. If you do not understand that simple division, then things get a lot harder, right? Prayer is the active part, meditation is the inactive part. You talk with prayer, God talks with the meditation. That is the division, right? If you are having active thoughts, you are not in a state of meditation. It is really that simple. You still have some work to do. That doesn't mean you won't be able to attain it eventually. There is discipline involved, and discipline is extended over time. But there are some things in here that will almost certainly lead you in the wrong direction. Exactly. We have seen a couple examples of that already. When I say that, it is not something that I state lightly. I take your ability to choose your path as a very, very important thing, right? I do not wish to coerce anyone into my path, even people I am personally associated with. I am an example. I am here to be that example. I am here to live the most correct life that I can. But that does not mean a perfect one at all. It does not mean that I will not make mistakes at all. It does mean that I maintain correctability. And it does mean that I have at least achieved some things that other people wanted to. Now, I am not financially flush, right? I do not manifest money. That is due to the laws of creation. I manifest success, right? This channel is part of that. I am successful in this channel even if I never reach 5,000 subs. I can't say 4,000 because I'm past that, but even if we never in 40 years break 5,000 subs, I've already had people who are still on this planet because of something that I have said. That is a win. Straight off the top, I have been successful. I have relayed information in such a way that other people have found it useful in their life, has led to the betterment of their life. That is success for me. That is the whole of the success that I need from what I do here. It would be wonderful if eventually we get to 1 million people who are followers and I get monetized in such a way that I am flush and able to give away money. That would be great. But it's not a necessity for what I do. And if it never shows up, that is fine. If I die tomorrow and my channel just goes off into history, I've already succeeded. There may be physical, monetary remuneration coming, but that is not the goal. The goal is the truth. The goal is to relay as accurately, openly, and honestly as I can how to do these things. To clarify where there have been some misunderstandings, to show that there is a higher path, to be the example, but I'm not going to force anybody to follow. People have seen what is different in me, right? And I'm not just saying that, and I'm not even talking about my immediate family. People that only tangentially know me, people that I walk in the morning and I talk to, know the difference in me. People from my old life do not even recognize me, and they see my physicality. They know me, but they don't recognize me because now I am me. I am living my authentic life. I am talking about what I feel like I am called to talk about. I am clarifying the things that I feel like the divine wants me to do. And I have results. Once again, I do not speak idly about the things that are in this book. This was me asking for healing. Now, it took me over 10 years to feel like I was worthy enough to even ask for healing. That is a real thing. My self-esteem was so low when I began this channel that I didn't ask for healing until after I had already started this channel. I never asked God to heal me. And when I did, I started doing that. It got revealed to me how to heal myself, and I put it into practice, and it worked. I can talk. The cyst is gone. Now, there can be an argument made because my vocal cords are not quite up to snuff. And why not? Right? If I'm doing magic and I remove the cyst, then why did it not fix my vocal cords? I don't know. Maybe it's some further trial that I have to go through. Maybe it's just I have to put in the work. Maybe I haven't discovered the right way to do it. I don't know. What I do know is the cyst is gone, and I am able to vary my tone of voice, and I couldn't do that for 3 whole years. I'm able to wake up in the morning and not be in pain for the first time since 2011. My life is physically different. My life is spiritually different. That is the fruit that I have borne. That is what has come out from what I have taught. That is what has come out. I've had people stay on the planet. I have people change their life in a positive manner because of the things that I say. And that is the point of what I do. I don't need success beyond that. I want it. I desire it. It would be great to be able to pay my bills on time, right? Or even pay them in full. That would be wonderful. To not have to wonder if maybe this time I'm not going to be able to pay the bill. But if that doesn't come, that's fine too. God will work it out when he wants to. I have been provided for through so much that I cannot even doubt it. And so I walk the path that has been put before me as bravely as I possibly can. I am here to clarify things, and that is going to step on toes. I stepped on toes all the way through the Bible study. I guarantee you that. I stepped on toes all the way through the Esoterica playlist, all the way through the Infinite Integrations playlist. I step on psychologists' toes. I step on medical professionals' toes. I will step on anybody's toes if they are full of shit. I don't care who it is. I don't care how long it has been written. If it is wrong, it is wrong, and it is that simple to me. I can be wrong. I am correctable. I try to be anyway. And if I am wrong and I am corrected, I will be just as public, just as loud about the correction as I am about the mistake. The maintaining that attitude of correctability is intrinsic to this process. If you are not able to be corrected, you might as well not even begin this. If you cannot operate in an area of humility, don't attempt this. If you cannot be disciplined in your thoughts and actions, don't do this. You will hurt yourself. It is possible to hurt yourself by this. I have more warnings in this book, right? I've got at least 3 chapters that start with a warning. And then there are extra warnings inserted inside the chapters because this can be dangerous. It's not intrinsically so, but if you do it the wrong way or with the wrong intentions, it will reverberate. You will feel it. It will happen. Bringing yourself into accordance is not that hard, but it requires discipline. It requires the desire to have it happen. But if you want it, you can have it. And that's where I'm going to leave it. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, drop it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. That is a key. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of the book where I teach you to do magic responsibly with a lot less wordage. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Fitz Tate. Peace.